Not only are they creative and artistic, but they also have an agenda. And I keep thinking of the Silicon Valley Computer Society back in 1974 out of California, recreating the idea of the computer, inventing the idea of the personal computer. And I think that some of the same societal excitement, some of the same civic agenda is going at work in this group. It has that. Well, you can tell for yourself, this is a group that's going to make a lot of noise.
The entertainment.
Yes. I think they agree. This is a group that wants to change society through robotics.
The Robot Group was founded in the spring of 1989 by a small group of artists and engineers who shared a common vision. Utilizing technology to provide and explore new mediums for art, and through that art stimulating a broad cultural familiarity and playfulness with high technology. In this way, the technology is pushed to its full potential. The intermeshing of art and technology has interested a diverse audience of young and old alike. The Robot Group has produced works which are now receiving national recognition. This response has included feature articles in Mondo 2000 and Newsweek, invitations to display at the Smithsonian Institution, and an interview by Boing Boing magazine. The Robot Group was featured in the debut episode of the Art Brigade television series, which has been broadcast nationwide. RoboFest 1, November 5th, 1989, was held at Discovery Hall, a hands-on science museum in Austin. It was the first public exhibition of the Robot Group's work. The pieces presented to a curious crowd included a four-legged, computerized walking sculpture named Varmint, an eight-legged, segmented metallic centipede, a fish blimp that swam through the air by using a tail fin for propulsion, another blimp with a small onboard computer that directed the activity of the cybernetic airship by controlling the speed and angle of two propellers, the Venus Project, an interactive exhibit in which the participant wore headgear with tilt sensors and danced on a stomp pad to create music and simultaneous computer graphics. RoboFest 1 broke all previous attendance records at the museum. In May of 1990, the Robot Group sponsored the first annual Cyberspace Convention, also held at Discovery Hall. Dedicated to increasing public exposure to the cyber arts, this event showcased the Sense8 virtual world system. The Cyberspace Convention served to introduce the Austin public and the arts community to virtual reality, as well as attracting an international group of scientists attending the University of Texas Cyberspace Conference held concurrently. At the Cyberspace Convention, the Robot Group exercised several of their previously demonstrated pieces, as well as new works, including the bipedal ornithopter, a 12-foot-long airship with running legs and insect-like wings. Also on exhibit was a space shuttle simulator developed by the Keeling Junior High School students with assistance from the Robot Group. This mock-up featured a large robotic manipulator arm constructed by the science students out of salvaged objects. The simulator was used by students to fly missions, such as rescuing satellites and performing onboard experiments, during which the flight and ground crews communicated by way of computer terminals and video cameras. Performance art and live music continued the Cyberspace Convention's celebration of the cyber art aesthetic and entertained visitors waiting for their turn to experience virtual reality. RoboFest 2, held in February of 1991, brought well over 4,000 people through the doors of Discovery Hall to witness the proliferation of Robot Group projects. Featured were android hands, ranging from wire-actuated nylon digits to foam and string android gloves that visitors could put on and work with their own fingers. Sonic Silhouette, the second Venus Project interactive exhibit, featured an interface with a controlling computer that tracked participants' movements as they walked or danced within a defined space. The movements were mapped into a virtual musical matrix that drove melodic and percussive synthesizers to accompany the user's actions. Several of the works exhibited at RoboFest 2 marked the emergence of the group's use of modern composite materials and custom computers. One such piece was the Mark II Enhanced Cybernetic Airship, a platform for artificial intelligence. Also making its debut at RoboFest 2 was the All Robotic Performance Ensemble, Shrinking Robot Heads. This consisted of 4 mechanical musicians interfaced to a computer and vividly decorated with neon tubes and bright paint. They rattled, slapped, crashed, and buzzed to the amazement of the crowd, which exceeded all the previous attendance records for Discovery Hall.
These ideas, the cybernetic airships and robotic music ensemble, have continued to evolve since their early years. These projects have remained in the foreground of the group's public image. The blimps also were the first testbed for the group's research into sensing and autonomous behavior.
The entire atmosphere will be like the ocean, full of these huge cybernetic creatures that inhabit it, just like whales swim the seas. My interest in blimps comes from having grown up. My father's an airline pilot, and he was always buying old airplanes and working with experimental airplanes, and so we went through about 27 of them, and I hated working on them, but I learned all the design principles involved. And so when the group got interested in blimps, I remember Bill's first comment, "Hey, why don't we build blimps?" And that was enough to get me going.
The blimps were probably one of the very first of the robot group projects, and it seemed, going back to almost the original meetings, we started out, and originally, if I can remember it correctly, what we were talking about was building a giant outdoor blimp that could track pollution sources via some sort of chemical sensor system that did like mass spectroscopy, and we would like track down pollution sources. And it's still a pretty cool idea. It's well beyond the scope of anything that I think we'll be doing in the next couple of years, unless we get a lot of money. We did the first one, the Mark I, where we had your fairly nice chassis on them, and we completely screwed up the size of the motor and the ability to go up and down. That we originally had a bottle of water for ballast, and we had a automatic squirt gun. That was, while it was perhaps fun as a toy, it wasn't really a very practical system. And that was the first generation. That was just kind of trying to build something that ran. I think we were thinking that it would be an easy data collection platform.
When someone walks in, they don't know what the technical features are, but if you can impress them off the bat with the way it looks, then you've gained some ground with impressing them right away. And sometimes that, then if you can capture their interest, then you can interest them in the other aspects of it too, the more technical features. So
the first one had a Motorola HC11 EVB little evaluation computer kit, and an extremely rudimentary program which randomly selected things to do, like go forward at such a speed or turn, and then it also randomly waited in a quiescent state for periods of time. Then we started experimenting with some more high-level control, and we ran a tether from a PC up to the system, and we recorded the commands that we were giving and tried to record the responses from the system with the ultrasonic sensors. And that was a pretty important evolutionary stage because it allowed us to start developing more complex programs. Immediately after that, we sunk a lot of work into getting a lot higher level control going. We used a hobby radio control system and basically totally bastardized it by putting a computer in the middle and watching what was happening. And really came up with a fairly sophisticated training platform for developing the control algorithms. We had a 68332 microcontroller system that the high-level software ran on, and which also collected and retained a lot of training data while the machine was flying.
This part of the project has to do with putting the intelligence in the blimp so that we can have an onboard computer that will react to what the blimp sees on its sonar and determine what the motor should do. The idea being that we want the blimp to be able to fly around autonomously in a space like, for example, the Texas Museum of Natural History, and not run into things. Eventually, we may even want to add the capability for it to do things like pick out a person in the audience and follow them, but that's later on. Right now, what happens is that somebody stands next to the blimp with a small radio control unit and drives the blimp around inside a space. While that person is doing that, we're collecting data on what the motor values are set to as the person steers it and what the sonar is seeing. They collect that data, they then bring that back, put it on a floppy disk, and give it to me. I'm going to show you some examples of what that data looks like, and then talk a little bit how I then use that data to train what's called a neural network that will act as the autonomous agent for the blimp. If you were to imagine that this is the center of the blimp, and this direction is forward from the blimp, what we're seeing here is the scan values that the sonar sees as it spins around. There's a sonar unit attached to the bottom of the blimp, and that sonar unit rotates. And what you're seeing is the values of each position as the sonar takes those 36 scans around here, and you're seeing the values. And if the values are large, well, then this pie moves quite a ways out. If there's something close to the blimp, then you'll see these values come in, like there's something probably right here in front of the blimp right now. Now there's something over here on the side. This little box here, is the height. For every scan here, we have one other sonar unit that then looks down once. So this tells us how far off the ground we are. Now, if the neural network actually takes all these values and uses those as the input. So it knows what the blimp is seeing in terms of looking out in front and on the sides of it, and then how high it is off the ground. And that takes those values and uses those to then produce the proper motor output. Like, for example, we're probably close to a wall right here. And what probably happened is we probably turned away from the wall. So then we saw so what happened is the blimp probably turned this direction. So the wall went from being seen here to being seen here. So next what I'm going to do is show you what the actual data looks like that is collected from the blimp. And it's just a series of numbers. And what this is this says that sonar position 1 is the one that's currently, this is the data for, and the value of that for that sonar position is 19. So it's looking out and it sees something 19 units out. All the other values are 0 because that is all the other sonar positions that are available as it scans around, and this is the only one that's currently active. From here, the 60 on down, these are all values that relate to the motor setting. What angle the motors are at, what the throttle value is, whether the motors are moving forward or backward. So the idea in training a neural net is to give it these sonar values and ask it to produce these motor values, so that when it sees a particular sonar situation, it reacts to it by setting the motors to appropriate values, to either avoid objects or to start a turn if it's flying towards something, etc. And we have in this particular file 5,000 samples, and those samples came from when Brooks Coleman flew the blimp for about 10 minutes. Okay, now, the way a neural network behaves is that each of these little squares here represents what we call a neuron. And each of these dotted lines represents a connection so these set of neurons are completely connected to this layer of neurons, or completely connected to this layer of neurons. This layer down here at the bottom are what is called the input layer. Into each neuron is put a value from the inputs in that file that you saw earlier. For example, this neuron right here says what sonar position is currently active, and then these are all the values for each of the sonar positions. This is what's referred to as a hidden layer, and I'll talk about that later. These output values up here are the values that are associated with the motor. So what we want to have happen is we put in a particular set of inputs which represent the sonar values. They are run through the neural network, and we want the neural network to provide the proper set of outputs for the motor values. Now, when you start a neural network, it doesn't know how to do anything. All of these connections are just essentially set at random. So when you put something into the neural network, it will produce some random output. Now, when we train a neural network, what we do is we give it an input, it produces an output, and then we look at the difference between that output and what we really wanted. That's an error term. We take that error term and then adjust the values of all these connections in here. Then we put the next input through, look for the output. And we just keep putting these inputs through, looking for the proper outputs, calculate an error term, and then bring the error back and make corrections to the weights. And eventually what happens is these weights get adjusted such that for all the inputs, the neural network is able to come very close to producing the proper outputs.
We spent several months of weekends collecting training data and offloading it to train on a PC backpropagation program. And the results of the training were indicating that we were making progress, but the efforts involved in setting up the blimp each weekend to collect data cost us roughly $50 to $100 each weekend. And just the sheer time element and the incredible amount of training data that was being required basically shut the project down. And John Lovgren recommended that we investigate more scanning algorithms, more algorithms and methods for collecting data.
Well, basically the information wasn't sufficient.
Yeah, basically the information we were collecting was not sufficient for training the blimp to do what we wanted it to do, basically, which was we wanted it to not be self-abusive, like run into walls, but we wanted it to be curious about spaces that it hadn't been in before, large spaces, but we wanted it to go exploring. You know, the safest thing to do is to go to some huge space and just sit there if you're a blimp. But if you're a curious blimp, you want to go check out things like elevator shafts and move around underneath the bridges inside of atriums of large bank buildings and the like.
We wanted it to maintain a motion and not just sit still continuously, but we also wanted it to be able to maneuver in an area. And one of the things that we were having is that that there was a person standing on the ground that looked at it and could see the entire the entire blimp in front of it without, and was not using the same data as the blimp was obtaining to navigate. So you had a God's eye view. You could see all of the environment rather than the environment as projected from the data that we were collecting. And I think that was one of the substantial problems, because because we started training the data, we ran some of the analysis on it. And I think what we were finding was that it wasn't gaining enough information to actually make the decisions that we were making for it, because we could see the entire environment and did not rely upon the data that was being acquired by the blimp. The blimps were successful in several ways. One is that they're visually impressive. That there are not very many people that can see a 25-foot big silver thing floating around in a room and not think it was pretty cool. So they're really popular as far as their visual aspects. Popular things, and people still think, oh yeah, you guys are the guys with the blimps, even though that's kind of not what our principal thrust is at this time. But I think that they'll probably end up being pretty much one of our trademark sort of things, is that we did so much work in the early period with them that I think they're very recognizable, and there was a lot, that I think that's one thing I want to, that's about the robot group. It's like we go through relatively small amounts of money, and that the price for failure is low. That if we were working on a military contract here or something and said, we're going to provide these blimps that'll do X, Y, and Z, it would have been a total failure. But what we really have, claiming that we're an arts group and kind of trying to squeeze a little technology development under the carpet, is that we can say, well, what we have done is you can always say, well, it was an art project. It looks really cool. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't wrong. It was just an art project.
The need for a less costly testbed for developing telepresence, navigation, and autonomy focused development on ground-based platforms. The predecessor to more complex forms was Dweeb Vision, a small remotely operated telepresence vehicle.
Dweeb Vision was a proof-of-concept telepresence project. It was demonstrated at RoboFest 3. Dweeb consists of 3 major components: a 4-wheel drive chassis, a pixel vision camera, and a video link. It works surprisingly well, so we used it again at RoboFest 4 and 5. It's called Dweeb because it has no onboard smarts, and it's a catchy name that the kids like.
reflections and thoughts on how your thing went?
I think it went really well today. The batteries held up much longer than I thought. I thought we'd burn the motor out in Dweeb Vision, but it's hung in there.
I noticed the kids had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, it's been running solid since 10 o'clock this morning without interruption.
You know, most of them didn't even realize they had a camera on it until someone pointed it out.
Well,
and they were even that much more excited about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just appreciate it on different levels. It was cute running around with a strobe on it, and then they realized they actually had a TV camera and a transmitter on it, and then they really saw what an interesting device it was.
This project is called the Mobile Platform. It's a mobile unit which can be a platform for other experiments. And that was generally the motivation, was to be able to haul around sensory, navigation, telepresence experiments through a variety of environments. One of the things we really tried to do was over-design, I would say. We didn't want things to break. We didn't want things to be too heavy for the platform. So we started with wheelchair motors that are meant to haul a person around, for instance. To control the system, we set up a program which does sort of basic motion algorithms and accepts motion primitives in form of ASCII commands. We got the mobile platform put together just a few days before RoboFest 4. And so that basically was its test run. And it was driven by children, adults, a variety of people with a telepresence apparatus, driven all day for 2 days, and survived. The mobile platform returned at RoboFest 5 in slightly different garb. We rebuilt the upper structure and added some slides to accommodate additional electronic equipment and allow us to change things a lot easier. The platform here is equipped with a mast to keep the radio gear up above the heads of people at RoboFest, because we found we got a lot better radio transmission when it wasn't transmitting through people. At the top of the mast, there's a telephone, which is part of our radio modem link. There's also a video transmitter. Down at the bottom of the mast is a video camera, and the driver is using that to telepresence. We're sending commands from the base station to tell the platform where to go, and the camera on board is sending back video which shows the operator where he is. As an alternative to the basic platform control for telepresence, which consists of a computer monitor and a video monitor for the operator, Carlos Pujol put together this system based around a Unix workstation. In this system, he has a joystick to drive the robot, and the video image returning from it appears on his screen. There's also some interesting software which plots the robot's trajectory in another window. I think one of the most interesting uses that we put the platform to was in conjunction with the body synth processor. Signals from the dancer's muscles are used to control a base station which sends information through another radio link back to the platform. One real interesting aspect of the Body Synth mobile platform collaboration was that it was entirely organized via the internet. Body Synth is located in San Francisco, and the robot group in Austin, of course. Basically, everything came together at RoboFest 5, and we tuned up the system in a half hour, and we were dancing.
Where you guys going?
Certainly the experiments with telepresence have given us a different perspective on what senses we use to get around. Well, one of the holy grails, if you will, of robotics is intelligent control. And when you start to use the robot sensors, even in a telepresence environment, you realize how difficult that is. Then when you get into actually using a computer instead of yourself to interpret those sensors, you realize how almost impossible it is.
How to build a flying saucer after so many amateurs have failed.
The environment of the later RoboFest grew into a complex and organic art experience where demonstrations of homebrew technology were blended with elements of theater, music, visual arts, and telecommunication to produce a weird but tasty soup.
Its design consists of wheels within wheels. Thrust of the vortex. A larger hyperspace drive, as this particular design is called, will provide a small but constant acceleration for interplanetary spacecraft that would accumulate practical velocities over runs of several days.
Today,